So thank you, Emmanuel, and thank you, Earth, for the invitation this year as well. So it's my second year in EXPANDEO. I'm glad to be back. This debate, so as Emmanuel said, started 1 year ago with the first introduction of security, discussion, and defense in EXPANDEO with a 1-hour session. And we decided this year to move and to bring, this discussion into 2 sessions dedicated to security and defense. So I would say maybe it's not a positive sign, because if we look back what happened over this last year, in only 1 year, the geopolitical situation considerably worsened. So we definitely need more time, I think, to walk you, the audience, through this evolution, but also to the increased importance of Earth observation services as a solution to answer to these growing and more complex space-based Earth observation needs that are emerging in the security and defense domain. So we'll explore more deeply this topic in 2 sessions. The first panel will focus on the institutional dimension of Earth observation for defense, going through the initiative that the EU institutions are developing in the defense, but also space sector. And I call here on stage the speakers of the first panel. And in the second panel, as we said before, we'll address the more operational aspects of around requirement gathering in Earth observation for defense, user need, and as well the future implementation in this environment. So welcome to the first panel and to the representative of the European Defence Agency, the EU Satellite Center that is joining us online, I think from the US, so it's very early in the morning for you, I guess, and to DG DEFIS. We have with us Alessandro Gugino, Project Manager of the European Defence Fund, Defence Technologies in DG DEFIS B2, European Commission, Milan Seguier from the Capability Development Directorate in EDA, Space Policy Officer, and Juan Luis Valero, Head of Brussels Office, European Union Satellite Center, SATCEN. So we'll have 2 rounds of questions together, and then I will open to Slido in order for the audience to intervene and to make some questions. I just remind you that our audience is made of private companies. Some of them are familiar with the delivering services in the security and defense domain, and others are not. And this is why we are going through some questions which would be a bit more, let's say, broader, and some other specific, so that you can understand, from the side of the ecosystem you are working in. So a couple of introductory remarks before I give you the floor, so to set the scene for you, the speakers. So we are in a very different situation, I would say, compared to last year when we started this discussion. The security and defense environment has evolved, and not, I would say, in a positive note. So we are still facing growing geopolitical instability. The war in Ukraine that we addressed a lot last year is not ended. We have a multiplication of other crises, as well in the Middle East, and not only Europe. Hybrid threats that are developing as well, and in our territory, we all saw the drones in Europe flying this year, and rising of global competition with a deterioration of the US posture towards Europe. So all this reinforce the importance of so-called space-based Earth observation capability. EO is becoming a critical defense capability supporting a series of domains. First, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, but as well situational awareness, crisis response, infrastructure protection, and monitoring. So let's start with our first round of questions. We'll have 20 minutes with 7-10 minutes for each, so you can take your time. Let's try with start with Alessandro Gugino. I would like first that the audience better understand the role of the Commission and DG DEFIS in particular as a stakeholder in the Earth observation for security and defense domain. So how has the EU approached the use of space for defense recently? And could you give us, to the audience, an overview of the defense program development of interest for the audience. Well, we all know about the EDF, but you have published this year EDIP. The EUDIS accelerator has evolved as well, and they all have an Earth observation dimension. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you all for the invitation. Indeed, let's start with the current situation, because, as you said, has worsened, and it requests from the EU institution also some effect, some answers to this situation. Now, in DG DEFIS, in our directorate, we have several topics in our, say, portfolio, but one of most of the important is space. So space and defense is in the DNA of the directorate, I would say, defense in DEFIS. And I mean, since the starting of all our activities, it was clear that all the system, the space system, were the backbone of the military operation going nowadays, unfortunately, also in the current war in Ukraine. Meaning that all the services from the satellites can be hacked, can be, of course, deteriorated, and this will create risks on all the, I would say, militaries that are on the ground. So we took this seriously in terms of activities to be implemented. And the first reaction, if you remember, was our, I would say, policy guideline at the moment, which is the white paper. On the 19th of March last year, the Commission, with High Representative, published the white paper. In the white paper, there was, of course, an action plan where there were several, I would say, pillars. The first was the novelty, which you may know about SAFE, because it was a totally new, I would say, initiative. It's the security action for Europe. SAFE nowadays, it's growing in terms of interest from member states. It's, of course, an action for member states.
Maybe you can precise what is SAFE loans for.
Yes,
for
so SAFE is mainly an initiative for member states to participate in terms of loans. So we are not talking about grants or procurement. Are loans to be given to member states. In these, we say, member states, you have to take into account, of course, Ukraine. There are also EFTA countries that can also participate, and also in European markets, also these member states can also participate to these loans. At the moment, the more recent news are, of course, Poland is in the lead of that, because they started to request the loans. We already signed contract with them, so it's an ongoing process, but you can imagine the ambition, because we are talking about 150 billion euro. So it's a quite ambitious activities. But again, this is mainly for member states to procure specific, I would say, elements which are also touching the space. We have two main baskets in SAFE in terms of product to be, I would say, by the member state to the industry, so it's a sort of way to implement, also foster the industry capability. And the space is in the second basket, where there is also an additional authority established in order to fulfill some criteria dedicated for specific niche, while space is. So this is, at the moment, what is about SAFE. Then, if we move in our, I would say, catalog, I would say like that, we have also EDF, which is the backbone. Now is the most well-known, I think, program that we have. We are at the end of the MFF, but from EDF, which was started by two different precursor programs, there were also a sort of a spin-off due to the Ukraine situation with ASAP and EDIRPA. This was a sort of reaction to ramp up production. Now this is now reflected in the new program that we have, the EDIP, so the European Defense Industry Program, where inside we have different pillars, including, of course, common procurement action, industrial reinforcement action. So in the new program that is now on the making in our DG, we introduce a a more concrete elements for industry, for member states, in order to help the ramping up of the activities. Then, of course, you introduce also UDIS, which was and is a scheme for startup. So in the ADF in 2021, there was the need to include also startup newcomers from space, and now UDIS will become a new program, Agile. So it's now under discussion. Has been, I mean, we move from the Commission to our co-legislator now, and Agile will be a real program more than a scheme, where the intention is to have a really fast track, meaning that from signature, from proposal to grant will be 4 months. So we are very short timeline with roughly 4 to 5 million budget per each project that we will endorse and award it. So there are a lot of activities that are ongoing at the European Commission, at the Commission level, but mainly since we are talking about Earth observation, let me just put some elements here. So in ADF, we have in the space category of action, of course, the SPIDER. This is well known. Now we are going to sign the grant of the SPIDER phase 2. But we have also dedicated for the small medium enterprises in 2025 2 new projects, which is EO-blinding and GNS Armor, which are related to the Earth observation and, of course, deterioration of signal from space. And those projects will be indirect managed by ADA. And regarding other activities that can be interesting of the audience regarding Earth observation, in the common procurement action in ADIDP, we have a specific call which will request sensors, elements that stem out from the Earth observation. This call will be published in 1 week, and then it will be end date February next year. Just to let our audience that there are a lot of activities going around.
Okay, thank you very much. So a very short recap, maybe, to sum up what you said in all this defense program ecosystem. So we have SAFE, which is a budget, loans that the Commission is giving to the member states, and the member states can procure defense equipment, including Earth observation systems, SAR data, and whatever. Then EDF, which is a research and development fund, where of course you can participate, and you mentioned SPIDER, which is a very important project, like a sort of precursor of the federation layer of the future EOGS. ADIP, which is basically an acceleration of ramp-up capacity, so you can basically use this funding to develop the procurement of SAR data or system, for example, and UDIS more for the acceleration as well in the Earth observation system. Turning back to you, Milan, from EDA. So here again, a very generic question on the role, to start with, on the role of EDA. What is EDA playing in relation, what role is EDA playing in relation to the development of the Earth observation for defense capabilities? And what are the complementarity with what DG DEFIS just said? And as well, why not NATO, if you can add a word on that? So how does EDA fits into this institutional defense landscape at EU level? And second, a bit more detailed question, what might be the main capabilities, gap, and challenges for the intersection of space and defense from the defense capability perspective?
Yeah. So thank you very much. I will actually start answering your second question first, but first a word to, of course, thank the organizers for having the EDA here, for you as well to be moderating this. And hopefully today, in the short amount of time that we have, I will go straight into substance. Again, I don't know the level of familiarity that the audience has about the European Defense Agency, the EDA. Doesn't help that we share one letter with EDF, doesn't share that we share one letter with ESA. So I know that it's that there can be some confusion, but in a nutshell, we are an intergovernmental agency of the Union. So that means that we sit, let's say, under the Council, and our steering board, so basically our bosses, are the 27 ministers of defense. Okay, so report out to them. Okay, so they come to Brussels twice a year on the occasion of the Foreign Affairs Council. There's a Foreign Affairs Council and Defense format. That's the 27 Ministers of Defense coming year. And that's our steering board, okay? So we report out to them. And I wanted to put that because I think that's important as well for you to understand that there's still that element and that debate of sovereignty and member states' competence versus the communitarian approach. And we sit, let's say, in this equilibrium with our colleagues here in town and back in the capitals. So you asked me about the gaps and challenges for the intersection of space and defense from the pure defense capabilities perspective. So in our view at EDA, and that's one of the things that we've been working on the last year and a half, it kind of goes down to two words that in our view are used and abused. It's dual use. Okay, so dual use, it's something that we talk about a lot, but the difficulty is that it's not defined in any legislation at EU level. It appears in EU regulation. You have an EU regulation, dual use mentioned, with, let's say, common approaches which are mentioned, but there's not a proper definition anywhere. And everyone in this room, I think, could give me a different definition, right? And you'd all be right, because it also is about the civilian part first, the defense part first, the complementarity between the two. So it means kind of something a little bit different for everybody. And the ambiguity really isn't a side issue. In our view, it is the gap that we have to fill. Because under the banner of dual use, you can justify almost anything, and you can pull anything in either direction. So you can have civilian institutions reaching for defense money on the argument that what they build is dual use, and you can have defense actors leaning on civilian capabilities because it's dual use too. And it opens a lot of questions, which in my view are not all of them comfortable. If a civilian asset, like a commercial satellite or an EU constellation that many of you operate, is repurposed to serve a military purpose, does that make it a legitimate military target? If something goes wrong, who owns the risk? Who takes responsibility? Who guarantees the security of the data and the link? So these are questions that, as a commercial operator, ends up asking at the moment their imagery starts informing an operational picture. Don't have to remind you about the Viasat incident. So at EDA, we try to bring some order to this, very modestly, if I could say, through a food for thought. So it's a paper, right? It cannot come with, cannot here announce that we've solved the problem. We're trying to think about it and basically give the defense perspective on what it would mean for us. Let me say a word about what that the Defense in Space Forum is, because I think it's important, and maybe not everybody in the audience knows that. So at the EDA, we function in different working groups, and we've got different, let's say, capability expert groups, capability planning groups, research groups through the CapTechs that some of you maybe are involved in, but I'm from the capability side, and the Defense in Space Forum is the venue where we host to coordinate the defense dimension of space, as it's in the name. So it brings together the member states, the 27 capitals, but also the Commission colleagues, DG DEFIS, the EAS, the EU military staff, which is also in the room, USPA, SATSEN, and also NATO and ESA joining for the relevant agenda items. So it's where we work out common positions on exactly the issues that fall between the civilian and the military worlds. So dual use, and this is a bit of a lapsus I think that I did between words and worlds, but military worlds. Dual use being the clearest example. It's also where, because you talked about NATO, is also where NATO comes to brief us. So we have a NATO dedicated agenda item in the Defense in Space Forum on top of the structured dialogues, etc., which I will also talk about in these remarks. So what the paper itself does, the dual use paper that we put forward, it moves us away from asking what a system is, because on that test, in our view, everything can be dual use. So my pen is dual use, my toothbrush is dual use. So it's an absurd reductio, I know that, but the problem is that it's precisely why we think that we need to ask a different question. So instead we ask how a system is designed and how it's governed. That's the capability-based approach. So we're coming from the capability design perspective. And let us draw a line between the two things very clearly. On the one side, dual use by design. Okay, so it's basically a system that it would be built first and foremost for military users that also happens to serve civilians. GPS is kind of the textbook example in that regard. On the other side, what we've coined as adaptive dual use, so a civilian system that is pressed into military service. So Starlink, its evolution into Starshield, for example, but Starlink over Ukraine is kind of the obvious example of that adaptive dual use angle. And the reason on why we insist on design, capability design, is because it has to mean more than technical specs. It has to really cover the requirements angle, the governance, the security architecture, the training. It's basically part of what we call the capability development lines. It has a very difficult acronym with a lot of letters that I'm not going to drown you with today. So if you ask me what the headline gap is between the space and defense nexus, it really is that we don't have shared clarity on what it entails and for the future legally and operationally in terms of ownership. We'll pause there in case you have a follow-up question. Otherwise, I'll continue to the second question.
I will interrupt you
Yes.
and intervene with a bit provocative comment. When it comes to dual use that you mentioned many times in your intervention, well, dual use, from my understanding, is very much related to technology, which is agnostic. But then when it comes to application, and we saw it in the Earth observation domain over the past 3 years, related to Copernicus, when it comes to application, the solution, even in the Earth observation, either has a defense use or a civilian use. They cannot always be dual in the application. Example, Copernicus program. We couldn't use it for Ukraine, and there was a big debate, and this led the Commission to basically propose to develop another service, the AO for governmental service. So I think that not always, and we come into this Earth observation for defense, military use, where we need to have maybe some tools and equipment and solutions that are adapted only to military. So we have a sort of a game of requirements which are a bit different. And this is where basically our private sector have sometimes difficulty, because when it comes to a defense solution in the Earth observation domain, there are some requirements like security, confidentiality of information, securing the data flow, having a cloud which is basically compliant with military requirement, etc. So I would be a bit more maybe less dual than what you said.
No, but I think it's definitely an interesting follow-up. The point is that for us, saying I'm a civilian tool, my civilian tool can be used by militaries, therefore I want defense funds, and the military is going to use it, and basically I can serve the military to the best of my capacity, in our view is not enough, because it asks a lot of follow-up questions. So we just really have to be a little bit, that we have to make the difference and strike a delicate balance between being pragmatic, of course, like for what's available on the market to serve the military users that might need something immediately, and what it means in the future. Switch on, switch off if you're purchasing commercially off-the-shelf services and systems which are not operated in Europe, but that's just one example among many. So for us, it really comes down to this. It's about if you're going to design a system that primarily has to serve the military, or that is designed to serve the military, it needs to have very strict, stringent requirements, because that's the way that it works, and we cannot allow any flexibility on this. So for me, it's really important that to underline this. So, but I think that the point you make, of course, is interesting, and that actually shows that the debate is still ongoing. That's why my eye twitches when I hear the word, because it's just not such a clear-cut understanding. I have an understanding, and you just came to me and say, I have a different one. That was what I said in the beginning of my propos, that we have all different understandings of what is behind this. So on complementarity with NATO, because that was the other question that you asked, and complementarity with DEFIS. With DEFIS and the Commission, I mean, we work extremely well. We're part of the same team, so there's, let's say, on the EDF, as Alessandro mentioned, we can be part of the co-financing mechanism, so basically the money that comes from the member states for the EDF projects. So we do that for a series of EDF projects, notably, and as Alessandro said, 2 more that are coming for the space field, but there's just so many arrays where the DEFIS EDA collaboration is undergoing that I think I could take the whole speech on this, and I don't think that it will interest you that much. But on NATO, I think it can be interesting, because in fact there's not so much that I can say about the complementarity with NATO. in the sense that despite the fact that we share, I think, I'm going to say now, I don't want to risk it, but I think so. It's 4 EU member states that are not NATO allies. So on that regard, that poses certain issues. And of course, we work for the EU. So we have to look at what happens at the NATO level and try our best efforts to deconflict and to reduce duplications. But effectively, we don't serve necessarily exactly the same people and the same capitals. Now, we don't also have a security agreement with NATO, so there's a limit on what can be exchanged between the EU and NATO in that regard. But that doesn't mean that we don't talk. I mentioned NATO comes to the Defense and Space Forum to brief us on their projects. There's also a structured dialogue that is organized jointly with all the actors in the room that do space, DG DEFIS, us, EUMS, and other actors, where we really exchange twice a year in that sort of structured format. And we also have technical dialogues on space specifically, the next one happening next week. So we really have exchanges, and in the different proposal that was agreed between the EU and NATO, some of the elements you always see that you're encouraged, staff-to-staff exchanges are encouraged. So the language is, let's say, flexible enough that we can reach out to our colleagues on the other side. Maybe I'll stop there because I'm conscious of time.
Okay. Thank you very much. Coming back to you, Juan Luis, could you as well explain, as the other speakers start by explaining the generic role of your institution, the Satellite Center, in the space for defense ecosystem, and the way it contributes to the EU priorities, which mean the complementarities with the DG DEFIS, what we just heard, and with the EDA for the audience and the representative of the audience that are not familiar with you, but I don't think that there are so many. And the second part of the question, a bit more specialized and specific, what is the main source of demand that you have at the moment for Earth observation services in the context that we described at the beginning, where on top of the war in Ukraine, we have other and many crises that have occurred, especially in the Middle East. So where are the main needs today coming from, in which domains and part of the world?
Thank you, Sandra, and thank you, the organizers, for the opportunity to be at EXPANDEO, even if remotely. I hope that the connection is fine. So I think that your question goes to the heart of the current debate on Earth observation for security and defense in Europe. We have to consider that for many years, at least for many people, Earth observation was often presented mainly as a civilian or environmental capability. That remains to be true, of course, because Earth observation is essential for climate monitoring, disaster, agriculture, and so on. But the strategic environment has changed. So today, Earth observation is also a core component of Europe's security and defense picture. So the current geopolitical landscape has made this quite visible. We see the war in Ukraine, we see also the instability of the Middle East, Africa, the increased pressure in the maritime domain, hybrid also, irregular migration, and so on. So there is the clear need for a faster and more reliable situational awareness. So the point, it is no longer where the Earth observation matters for defense. It clearly does. The real question is how Europe organizes the full chain, trusted access to data, tasking, analysis, secure dissemination, and above all, exploitation by the users who need to take decisions or perform actions. So this is exactly where SATCEN has a specific role. Satellite Center is an EU agency providing geospatial intelligence in support of the common foreign and security policy and the common security and defense policy. We operate under the governance of the member states in a very similar way as EDA, with the political supervision of the PSC, the Political and Security Committee, and the operational direction by the High Representative, Mrs. Callas, that is delegated to the EIS. It is important to clarify a point. The Satellite Center does not own or operate any satellite. Our value is different. We transform satellite imagery and collateral data into timely, reliable, and user-driven geospatial intelligence. In practical terms, we are a bridge between the space assets and the operational and political requirements as well as decision-making. In the space for defense ecosystem, I will describe SATSEN contribution in three complementary ways. First, we are a operational joint provider. We supported institutions, member states, the EIS, SIAC, EU mission operation, and authorized users. This means supporting both political decision makers and operational users with independent, trusted, and actionable geospatial analysis. Second, SATSEN contributes to secure exploitation and dissemination. Producing a geo-aimed product is not enough if the right user cannot access it securely, rapidly, and in a format that is exploitable. Therefore, security that access, operational workflows, user engagement, and connection between analyst and user are part of the value chain. This is particularly important in defense and security, where timeliness and trust are as important as the technical quality of the data. Third, SATSEN also is a capability development actor because we are in close cooperation with operational users. We can help to translate concrete needs into future Earth observation capabilities. This is done in cooperation with the European Commission, the European Defence Agency, of course, European Space Agency, Frontex, member states, and other relevant actors. In this sense, it is not only a consumer of capability, it's also a contributor to capability development, not only considering the exploitation of artificial intelligence within an operational environment. This also makes SATSEN a very practical example of pooling and sharing at the EU level. Member states collectively support a capability whose benefits are available across the Union. SATSEN does not replace national intelligence capability. It complements them by providing a shared European capacity, rooting common requirements and common strategic awareness. So I will stop here for the sake of our time. Yes.
I think that we need to speed up and start with the second round. We need to be a bit shorter because we have, I would say, 15 minutes now. We can basically finalize the panel 12:30, 12:30, because we started a bit late. So 10 minutes shorter for the second round so that we can open the floor to the audience. So Alessandro, the EU is focusing, we talked about that, on dual use when it comes to Earth observation as well. But this domain has been dominated in the past by large and established actors, but we've seen since already some years emerging startups and small innovative players. So what role do you see small civilian Earth observation actor can play to support the future security and defense capabilities? And what are the EC initiatives and programs supporting smaller players in this field? Very rapidly.
Yes, so some of them I have already introduced in the previous answer, but just quickly, the need to have small, medium players, startups was already identified at EDF. So we introduced as a first action UDIS, we already discussed. UDIS is a really big scheme. So in all the new I would say newcomers in the space environment can be, I would say, sustained by this scheme in terms of financial access to finance, but also to really move forward in their research or development. So this is mainly for UDIS, and what else is part of the EDF. In EDF, we have also spinning calls. We understood that the dual use by design was important, so we introduced since years now dedicated spinning. Well, the proposal has to justify connection with other EU initiatives from ESA, from USPA, so these are dedicated for EDF. And last, because I already introduced Agile, Agile is the next step for procurement. So as said, is the way when the players want to go fast, they have already high-level TRL, and they want to move to the procurement path. So there, the DEFIS introduced this new program to help startups to move forward in the procurement line. So these are the three main elements we have in DEFIS.
Thank you. And for you, Milan, have the EDA, because you talked about the role of EDA, member state define an Earth observation for defense common doctrine between them?
Yes.
And?
So we do it through a very structured process. It's called Common Staff. Basically, we started looking at the requirements. So we go from Common Staff targets. So basically, we define the level of ambition. And then Common Staff requirements, where we look at, when we say we, it's not us, EDA, 3 bureaucrats in some dark office. We really have to go with all the capitals and bring staff officers from the EU27 working on space on the different subdomains we look at. SBO is one of them, space-based Earth observation, but also PNT, SATCOM, SSA, access to space and protection of space systems. So we look at all these fields. Common staff target, common staff requirements, and that's basically, let's say, we find the low-hanging fruits, so the common denominators, and from that we build business cases that translate into concrete projects. We do opt-in projects, so countries can get together. You start with 2 countries, 2 member states, and then everybody else can join in. Or opt-out, where basically you start with EU27 with an opt-out. They're called category A's, category B's. Voilà. So that's how it works.
Because when we are outside, and I always have the provocative questions for you. So we see more, national programs with the commercial Earth observation constellation, focusing as well on ISR, but very much on a national level. So this is why I wanted to see if you have basically an EU, development or come on. So this is why I asked you the question. Yeah.
Just very, 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 very quickly, because we also have the scary timer going down our screen. So because EOGS also was mentioned, and it's also part of the collaboration between EDA and DEFIS. So EOGS has been announced, etc. You said that it is dual use by design, and this is where the Political Security Committee that as well Juan Luis talked about invited the EDA to provide military requirements. Right, so they invited EDA to provide military requirements. So we did that for EOGS. So DGDEFIS came with the civilian requirements, EDA with the military requirements, and the EAS does the fusion of the high-level civil-military requirements. Okay. So that works like that as well.
Okay, very good, because you give me the transition talking about EOGS to Juan Luis. I just wanted to know for the audience, from you, what is the status of your involvement in EOGS, the announced program, the current organization, and how are you cooperating at the moment with European Commission, ESA, on this topic of the development and the launch of the program? And how are you as well involving the industry through tenders, demo, what else? Very shortly.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sandra. This is a very important question because there's also EOGS. It is not another technical initiative. It is part of the effort to organize Earth observation as a credible, trusted, and resilient capability for security and defense. Let me start with the status and a clarification, because I will speak from such a perspective. The European Commission and ESA are much better placed to comment on their own procurement and so on. So from our side, it is very important to point out that the EOGS should be understood as a progressive effort to move from today's existing capabilities to a more structured European governmental Earth observation service. In this sense, EOGS is about closing a gap. It is not about replacing what already exists. It is about reinforcing and federating capabilities, reducing dependencies, and also to strengthen trusted access and ensuring that the Union and the Member State can rely on secure and timely Earth observation data, products and services when they need them. And this is a key aspect. So the European Commission has a very central role in defining the future EOGS. ESA will bring the technical and programmatic and managerial expertise. And SATCEM will have a role that is different but complementary, because we are not a satellite manufacturer, we are not a space agency, we are an operational joint agency for the Union, and contribution is to bring the user and exploitation perspective into the system. So we fully understand the operational chain from request to data acquisition, analysis, secure dissemination, and use by decision makers. That experience is directly relevant to the EOGS. In practical terms, SATCEM contributes in 3 main ways to the EOGS. First, we anchor EOGS in real operational requirements. Second, we contribute to the pilot and service exploitation dimension. And third, Southern contribute to the governance and trust, where in security and defense, as many of you are familiar, governance, it is not administrative in detail. It is a fundamental element in order to develop an operational system.
Thank you.
Okay, I stop here.
Thank you. So we have a couple of minutes. I would open the floor to Slido and to the audience for 2 or 3 questions that we can address rapidly, and then wrap up with one last question for the speakers. So these are the only questions we have. So, which priority for defense readiness have software solutions that harmonize the data and primary processing layer between European member state space assets and the end application used by armed forces? It's not very clear. Who wants to take that one?
Need a second to digest.
Sorry,
yeah.
Well, I think the question, if I understand the question correctly, it's a little bit tricky to answer it because because it's kind of like it's putting the software solutions and the solution before the priority is defined. So I couldn't tell you that there's one specific priority that actually brings that. I would say that there's a series of priorities. At the EDA, we have this CARD, Coordinated Annual Review on Defense, which then gives the CDP, the Capability Development Plan. So that's the EU 27 agreed development priorities. And there you have everything from space to C2 to electronic warfare, etc. And in my view, some of these, that question, it kind of fits, it would fit several of these priorities, but probably more protection of space assets. But as I said, you first define the requirements, what is needed, the level of ambition, before you go in the concreteness of what commercial solutions or what solutions in general do you need to bridge that gap. That's how I would answer it.
Maybe this one, you consider that images from Venture, Airbus, or ISI are dual use. Maybe for Juan Luis from the SATSEN, because you use data.
Well,
now we have others.
Currently, 80% of, 90%, more than 90% of the data that is used by satellite center is commercial. We're using also governmental data. So the key point in Earth observation on intelligence, it is the analysis that is performed over the analysis, over the data. This is the key element. And it's something that could come from the commercial side or could come from the governmental side. Without entering into too much detail, I can say that since last years, more than 80% in terms of value of the data that is used by the European Satellite Center is coming from European providers. That it shows the very high quality of European industry.
Thank you, very clear. Last question maybe from Slido. No? We have others?
I think it was about UK and EDA.
Yes, exactly.
That's very quick.
Yes, if you can answer this one.
Yeah, so EDA, we conduct administrative arrangements with third parties. So there's not an immediate trickle-down effect. If the UK, for example, there's a specific security agreement that was signed recently with the EU, same with Canada, that kind of opens the door for an administrative arrangement, the same way that we have with Switzerland, Norway, and others, and the US DoD. But at the moment, the relationship with the UK still has to be, let's say, evaluated further to engage.
Okay, thank you very much. Now to finalize this panel with the last question, but of interest for our audience, how to engage, that I will ask to the 3 of you with like asking you to answer with one sentence, how to engage the industry in a structured dialogue for upcoming activities. Good luck in the answer.
Yes, one sentence. How to engage. We have a specific, programs now ongoing, but for industry to take into, keep in touch with us. We have a specific info days at the European level, but also national level. We have a national focal point to understand all our bureaucracy, because of course European is in terms of programs is quite administrative burden. So and I think these are the main elements that you can use in order to enter in our, I would say, only our program initiatives.
Yeah, so for the capability development side of the house at EDA, I would say engage with your armaments directorate. You have to engage with your armament directorate because they are stakeholders. We don't engage directly with industry. We need to engage first with your armament directorate or your NDIAs, the ones that really oversee that. But that doesn't mean you cannot engage directly. On the research side, there's the CapTex, more research-oriented, where you can engage directly. And there's also an industry directorate that notably chapeaus the joint procurement EU SATCOM market project, which is totally industry-led, and that results from a long contracting process, but there's a sort of direct industry to EDA arrangement in that. But for the CAP side, we engage with the government, so through your capital.
Okay, thank you. And SATSEN, structured dialogue, info days, contact with industry?
Okay, very quickly. In fact, the industry could engage with SATSEN in two different ways. From a personal perspective, by providing the data with the service. The second perspective is concerning R&D, is one participation jointly with SATSEN in different R&D projects. And I would like to mention something that is very useful for the European industry, that regularly SATSEN organized the European industry days of satellite center, where the different industrial partners can showcase what they are doing and what is the status of the art.
Okay, thank you very much. And with this last question, I will close this panel and invite you to join me for a warm applause to the speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you.